Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 37, episode 7, The Battle of the Wabash. This episode was written by Doug Nipple. As any long-time listeners will know, Doug has written for us before, and he is a high school physics teacher who lives a few miles outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Growing up in one of the major areas of early American history, it was only a matter of time before he became obsessively interested in it. American Indian Wars, in the modern perspective, focuses mostly on the American West in the second half of the 19th century with cowboys, Custer, and the cavalry. But the worst defeat of an American army in the Indian Wars happened over 80 years earlier, when George Washington was president. In the 1790s, Native Americans in the Northwest Territory were pushing back on the increasing influx of American colonists moving into and settling the region. This was in violation of a variety of treaties that gave the land to the tribes. The Northwest Territory included the modern-day states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and the corresponding Great Lakes region. After the Revolutionary War, the British still had a military presence in that area, due to the proximity of Canadian waterways and their slow withdrawal from their wilderness outposts. The American government, under President George Washington, organized and sent an expedition to the territory to destroy or remove the Native Americans who were starting to attack the settlers moving into the area, essentially voiding the previous treaties. The government reasoned that because the natives who reside in the region had assisted the British in the Revolutionary War and were still in communication with British agents in the territory, that their claim on that region was forfeit. This rationale, combined with the increasing violence against the settlers, allowed a petition to the fledgling United States government from settlers and land speculators to find enough traction that an expedition to remove and or destroy the natives in the area was authorized. This expedition was led by General Josiah Harmar and tasked specifically with destroying a collection of tribes, including the Miami, led by Little Turtle. Harmar served in the Revolutionary War on the staff of Nathanael Greene, and was even complimented directly by George Washington as an excellent officer. At the end of the Revolutionary War, Harmar was nominated by Congress to return the ratified Treaty of Paris to Benjamin Franklin. During his extended time in Paris, Harmar lived well beyond his means and accrued a considerable debt. He had to then extend his time in the military due to his inability to pay off his debt, and by this time was not at his peak as a leader. Due to a lack of training, poor logistics, and poor overall leadership, Harmar's force was soundly defeated as he split his forces, did not reinforce them, and had native guerrilla tactics inflicted on him with a large toll on his force. The expedition retreated from the area. This became known as Harmar's defeat, with 200 casualties out of a force of over 1,400. The military then organized a second expedition that was placed under Arthur St. Clair. At the time, the United States Army only had one regiment of regular soldiers. After the Revolutionary War, there was a large drawdown in the number of soldiers in the federal military. Many states thought a standing federal army was a possible threat to democracy and preferred state militias. Because of Harmar's defeat, a second regiment of regulars was authorized by Congress. The second expedition was to begin before the end of the summer in 1791. As time passed, it was taking longer than expected to organize and supply a new force. Congress cut the soldiers' pay, and the size of the regiments was reduced. St. Clair had to augment his 2 undersized regiments of regulars with Kentucky militia and 2 additional regiments of 6-month militia. The expedition at the start totaled around 1,600 men. St. Clair was born in Scotland and joined the British Army, purchasing his rank. He fought in the French and Indian 7 Years' War. On the American continent, he was present at the capture of Louisbourg and at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham and the capture of Quebec. Staying in America, he became the largest landowner in the Ohio Valley and was a proponent for honest treaties and fair treatment of the Native Americans. As pre-revolution tensions with Britain grew, St. Clair became a patriot and was appointed a colonel in the Continental Army. Later he was promoted to brigadier general and suggested a strategic maneuver to George Washington that won the Battle of Princeton for the Americans and gained him lasting support from Washington. St. Clair was then given the key command of Fort Ticonderoga in New York State. This fort protected the northern flank of the colonies from invasion of the British from their bases in Canada. St. Clair failed to secure high ground surrounding the fort, allowing the British to position artillery there, bombing the fort and forcing its evacuation, and a quick British victory. St. Clair was court-martialed, but found support from Washington and maintained a rank, but never held another critical command for the rest of the Revolutionary War. After the Revolution, St. Clair was elected president of the Continental Congress. This was before the Constitution was ratified and the election of George Washington, who was considered the first president of the United States under the Constitution. After his term with the Congress was complete, St. Clair was then appointed to the governorship of the Northwest Ohio Territory. During this time he created the Treaty of Hamar with the indigenous people of the area. This directly contradicted his previous stance of fairness to the native Indians. The Treaty of Hamar forced the Native Americans from their land and directed a series of outposts to be built to protect settlers. This unfair treaty caused the area to erupt in violence. In August of 1791, the army sent a smaller force out as a distraction for St. Clair's thrust north. This was led by James Wilkinson, who engaged the natives in a small battle and took several prisoners, including the daughter of one of the natives' leaders, Chief Little Turtle. Over the summer, many of the tribes decided that they were going to negotiate with the government, as they saw the larger force under St. Clair gathering in Ohio. After Wilkinson's raid and the capture of the prisoners, the tribes lost their desire for negotiations and peace and focused on revenge. St. Clair and his expedition left Fort Washington near what is now Cincinnati, Ohio, in September. St. Clair took a cautious strategy, building a series of resupply and shelter forts as they moved into the hostile northwest region. 2 months later, the expedition was less than 100 miles from where they started. The winter had started early, and the force was quickly losing men to sickness, desertion, and death caused by the freezing conditions and inadequate supplies. The Native Americans consistently harassed the column. At the Wabash River, on the border of Ohio and Indiana, the expedition stopped to set up camp on the evening of November the 3rd. The militia were camped forward and across the river from the regular army regiments. This strategic blunder would make it difficult for the camps to support each other. Early in the evening, a group of militia was detached to drive off or try and capture some Native Americans who were firing into the camp. The soldiers found and fired on the natives, but soon realized this was a larger force than a group of skirmishers and retreated to the militia camp to warn them that they were possibly in the vicinity of a larger native force. The report was not passed along to St. Clair, and the camp's defences were not bolstered, even though the soldiers from the reconnaissance believed an attack could occur at any time. St. Clair, unaware of the presence of the natives and of any danger, established camp for the regulars on a wooded plain overlooking the river. Over the course of the night, approximately 1,000 natives surrounded the militia camp, and then moved into a wider position surrounding the regulars on the opposite side of the river. Early on the morning of November 4th, Little Turtle, with his tribe of Miami natives, complemented by a confederation of other native tribes, led by the chiefs Blue Jacket and Bucongahelas, attacked the militia camp across the river first. The militia folded under the early morning surprise attack and ran quickly back through the low river and into and through the regular regiments who were just waking at the sound of musket fire. Many of the militia were now unarmed after abandoning their firearms in the retreat. The regulars, however, had enough time to form lines and fire several volleys, as did the artillery. The artillery did not have an effect on the on-rushing natives, as it aimed high. The artillerists then were relegated to fighting hand to hand alongside the infantry as the natives crashed into the army lines and then retreated back to the woodline to continue a steady fire. Some bayonet charges were attempted to break the attack, but as soon as troops got out ahead of the lines, the natives would fade into the woods and draw the army further out, and then envelop and destroy them as they were drawn out from the main body of the army. The army was now fully surrounded and in the form of a rectangular box. The natives fired into them relentlessly from cover. The fighting continued into the afternoon, when it started to turn into a massacre of the army. Eventually, the natives began to charge into the weakening army forces, and a vicious hand-to-hand battle ensued. Women, who were camp followers, also fought for their lives. Some even forced their husbands back into battle as they tried to flee. As it started to look as if the army and militia would suffer complete annihilation, an ailing St. Clair showed personal bravery and led a group of remaining men on a breakout bayonet charge, heading back along the newly constructed Wilderness Road for the closest resupply and shelter fort. The gambit worked, and a breakout was achieved. The group was assigned rearguard action, but as soon as their commander was wounded, the retreat became a rout. The retreat headed for the Fort Jefferson. The natives pursued and harassed the retreating column for miles. There were approximately 1,400 officers and soldiers in St. Clair's expedition at the time of the attack. Over 900 of these were killed and almost 300 wounded. This is approximately a 67% casualty rate, 3 times the number of troops dead at Custer's loss at Little Bighorn. Since St. Clair's force was a majority of the United States Army at the time, this meant that over half of the standing army of the United States was dead or wounded at the Battle of the Wabash. As news of the defeat and massacre returned east, President Washington was appalled and demanded St. Clair's resignation, and the first congressional investigation was initiated. The next year, as a direct result of St. Clair's defeat, Congress increased the size of the army and renamed it the Legion of the United States, and the very capable, mad Anthony Wayne was given command. 2 years later, after much training and preparation, Wayne marched west and, at the Battle of the Fallen Timbers, strategically defeated the natives of the Ohio Valley. This resulted in the Treaty of Greenville and the Northwest Territory coming under American control. Well, thank you, Doug, for writing that episode for us. It's great to hear from you again.
If you'd like to write a script for us, just drop us a line at info@thehistorynetwork.org. Or if you'd like to hear a podcast on a subject that you think we may not have covered before, then again, just drop us a line and we'll look into it for you. Once again, if you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, just pop along to patreon.com/The History Network. And that just leaves me to thank you all again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Doug Nipple, read by Nick Barker.